Welcome to the Pulse Check podcast. I'm here in beautiful Switzerland. The weather has slightly improved before that. Here with Manuel Thomet, social partner at Impulse and responsible or spearheading embedded finance and also expert in banking as a service, which we will cover shortly. But before that, I typically start, as you know, with the icebreaker. So what is something that people may not know about you, but defines you, makes you you?
I think overall I'm an extremely versatile and multifaceted person. So I like to do brain work, so what I do at work, in the office, but I also very much love to work with my bare hands. So when I'm at home, I'm the construction guy and I do a lot of stuff with my kids, constructing things, running the remote control cars and so on. So that's my compensation at home. Also, I'm very eager in what I'm doing at Impulse, but also I like to really be a good dad and a good husband to my wife. So this kind of balance, job and private life, that's extremely important to me. And yeah, sport-wise, I mean, you're a sportsman and I try to do sports as well, and I try to balance it a bit between the fun sports, which require agility and balance, like snowboarding, surfing, skateboarding and the like. And on the other hand, I also like sports like golfing and tennis, which is something completely different. There it's more a bit about tactics, strategy and precision. So I think that's me overall.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I think that describes maybe also a bit your solution architecture type as being at home, fixing your house or car, but same then also for banks or insurance companies. And as a Swiss, of course, tennis is a sport we all follow since Roger Federer. Unfortunately, he is not playing anymore, but inspired all of us. With this, I would love to go right deep into the topics of your expertise. And one thing that we as Swiss are probably particularly proud of is we are often called as number one in innovation. There's a couple of global surveys and lists where Switzerland ranks quite high, and so we are at the top. So we are known for innovation. On the other hand, we have banking as a hundred of year old industry, very traditional. If you walk through Bahnhofstrasse, you can see the still black suits and tie, white shirts. That reminds you maybe more of someone died next door, but actually in banking still how people dress in other countries has changed a bit. So how do you see that? As there's innovation, there's also tradition. Is banking of the future to some extent built here in Switzerland, or is innovation not leveraged as much in the industry? Can you frame this a bit, especially since I've not been in Switzerland working here for quite a while?
Mm-hmm. I think overall it depends a bit on how you measure innovation. So that's maybe the question that we would need to answer first. But I tried to answer it from different angles. So I think if you look at the ecosystem that we have in Switzerland, the ecosystem fosters very much innovation in Switzerland. I heard that the other day at an event that compared to other countries, we are really at the forefront in that regard. Then if you look at the academia, I also read the other day a report in which was stated that from a European perspective, we have actually 2 universities in Switzerland that rank in the top 10 in terms of the spin-out value that is being created. So ETH in Zurich, I think you were at ETH, right?
I studied, yeah.
Exactly, they rank number 1 in Europe. And we have also the École Polytechnique in Lausanne, which ranks number 7. I think that's quite impressive. Then maybe a different angle, if you think about unicorns, everybody wants to become a unicorn, right? Mm-hmm. And Qubit Capital, which is a Swiss-American VC, they published a report the other day, and they came out with a figure which is there are over 50 unicorns that have been founded in Switzerland, even though not all in financial services. I don't know the exact number in FS, but I think that's a number, that's a statement. And maybe one last angle to look at it is the number of neobanks that we have relatively to the small size of the country. And if you look at also the different types of neobanks that we have in Switzerland that basically challenge a bit the traditional banking as well, we have Alpian, which is, they call themselves the first digital private bank in Switzerland. So we see that also the heritage of Switzerland, which is private banking, is being modernized as well.
Which is a very interesting one as well, because I've not seen this in Asia yet. I would love to maybe come back to that. Yeah, and that brings us right into the topic of embedded finance, because I also believe while in Hong Kong and Singapore, as example, the government pushed for digital virtual banking, and they made it very clear they have to fulfill the same regulatory standards in terms of capital requirements, but all the other elements as well. While having, of course, requirements of not having or operating a branch, which led a bit to the fact that, okay, it's a bit more of the same, while, of course, improvement in terms of digital experience and so on. So I like that ecosystem aspect, that embedded finance aspect, not having to have full banking license, but, of course, partnering, collaborating, and with this offering a new experience. So let's look into that. Maybe you can summarize first in simple terms what embedded finance means. Where do we stand in Switzerland, but maybe also globally, and what's coming?
So embedded finance is basically a new value chain with new actors that have specific roles. And that's basically the banks that focus on the production, whereas so-called embedders, which are non-banks normally, they focus on the distribution. So it's a change of the configuration of the value chain. So traditionally banks, they focus on the production, on the distribution and the servicing around all these banking products and services. And in embedded finance, this role play is a bit different. So banks focus basically only on the production. So I think that's overall the thing. Now, what is interesting is that embedded finance, that's the overall kind of name of this phenomenon. But it's more than that. It's for so-called embedders, which are non-banks. It's a business model opportunity. And that means also if such non-banks implement this business model, it requires a dedicated operating model. For the banks, it's the same. We call it banking as a service. So it's only the service which is provided to non-banks. Mm-hmm. And this is also a business model. And what actually happens is banks offer these services to non-banks, and those integrate those banking services in specific non-financial journeys and enrich those journeys and make sure that customers do not need to go after several journeys in parallel or a sequential way. It's like in one go. And that obviously is much easier for the end customer. And that's why it's actually a win for customers. It's a win for non-banks, so-called embedders, but also for banks.
Yeah, on that last note, while yes, it should be a win-win for all three of them, banks are a bit cautious. And it's an interesting one because in insurance, this is reality, at least in P&C, since a while, where, of course, travel insurance, you may sometimes not even fully realize with whom you actually you did the underwriting of the insurance policy. It's immediately embedded in the whole experience process. In a good experience, you go and book your trip, and then you also agree to buy an insurance. Banks, of course, they want to keep that customer engagement. They want to be directly linked to the customer and not be just at the back. So on that front, is that a hurdle also for the banks to really go into that business model, or do you see that they realize rather that, okay, yes, maybe in some case we lose direct customer contact, but the benefit we create through a wider distribution network is bigger. How do you rate that?
I think one of the most important points you have mentioned, I think for a traditional banker, and especially if you talk about private banking, there the personal interaction, the personal relationship is of utmost importance, right? And it's also one of the key differentiators. So for a traditional banker, it's obviously very challenging from a mindset point of view to kind of be degraded just to be a producer, right? To be a servant to a non-finance business that consumes in a very technical way those banking services. So I think that's one of the key points. If I look at the projects that I have done in embedded finance and banking as a service, this was always one of those discussions on the C-level. So when I talk to those people responsible for the retail business or for the SME business, and at the same time we had those people and folks that were really eager about this new opportunity arising, banking as a service, it was a clash, right? So it's not the same game, it's a different play. And it requires not only a change in terms of mindset, it's also a change in terms of culture, it's a change in terms of organization, of processes, of tech at the end of the day, because tech is absolutely essential. And I think there are different hurdles to overcome, but I think the key one is to acknowledge that you play a different role in this value chain. And I think that is for bankers quite a challenge to basically accept. But we see good examples. So if we look at the Nordics, I think one of the best examples in Europe is SEB. It's a Swedish bank. And they were really bold. They understood the business model opportunity, and they have even decided to basically ramp up something next to SEB, still under the umbrella of SEB, but something really separate. So in essence, they have built up a completely separate unit that was operating on a dedicated BaaS operating model, and it seems to work out. And I think that's going to be the pattern and a successful approach to follow.
Interesting, and brings me to maybe to a summary when we talk now about banking as a service. So I read a study that it's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity, and we see the hurdle, but it's also an opportunity to create new revenue streams. Can you maybe elaborate on that product as a service? You tapped on both retail, SME banking, but also private banking. What new revenue streams can you see that with this can be enabled? And I mean, maybe from my personal experience, I can tap on one that we had the travel insurance before, but likewise, as you like to travel, like to see new cultures, and you, for example, go to Japan, that might also be a trigger point for, okay, do I want to invest into Japan? Government bond or equities or even art and philanthropy elements for the ultra-high-net-worth individuals. But then, of course, in an embedded finance way, frictionless. So do you have some examples of new revenue streams you see?
So overall, maybe starting top down, as said, banking as a service is a business model, and the business model obviously requires to have dedicated revenue models, revenue streams coming along the way. And the opportunity of embedded finance or banking as a service from the bank's perspective is huge and very versatile, right? So any product basically in payments, in saving, in financing, in investing, or in pension contextually can be embedded in a non-bank journey. So I always tend to say it's limitless in terms of the use cases that you can implement. The challenge, though, is to find the proper use case in a specific industry where consumers are ready to consume these banking or financing services in this new embedded way, right? And this is probably the challenge that both banks and embedders have to look at in a very close kind of setup, in a partnership way. And they also have to think about how they basically share revenues, because banks obviously they have their attitude to make money, right? Everybody has to make money, but embedders also need to make money. Otherwise, it's not attractive for them to offer banking or financial service in general in their existing journeys. So, and I think this is one of the hot topics, to make sure that from an economic perspective, it is attractive for everybody. So it's not only about delivering great value to the consumers, it's also about making sure that there is a business case for the embedders to actually offer this. And it must also be ensured that banks can make at the end of the day a business case with banking as a service. And I think we're not at the end there. I think we're rather at the starting point to see how we can align the entire value chain from top to down, so that everybody is happy, makes money, and decides to continue with that kind of business model.
In the very first podcast episode with Yves Rösti, our CEO at Simpulse, but also expert in, we call it wealth as a service. We talked also about the democratization of wealth, and so giving access also to kind of the mass affluent or lower mass affluent to wealth products that are typically traditionally only accessible to the high net worth individuals, because there's a high cost to serve to make also those solutions bespoke. So I definitely, of course, concur that having banking as a service with an embedded finance principle to have it more easily accessible, more digitized, to have less manual processing, could then also help into giving everyone access to wealth product services they may not have. Brings me also maybe now to an outlook the next 5-10 years from now. I know 10 years is far from today, but what do you see as other trends in the next coming years?
So with regards to embedded finance and banking as a service, which I really like to differ. So embedded finance is the business model for non-banks, banking as a service for the banks. I think, and if I make a reference to the ongoing study that Simpulse is doing, we see out of the data that there is still some upside potential on the embedder side to actually understand what embedded finance is all about, to understand the economic opportunity, and to understand what should be offered to whom in what kind of context. So there is still some work to get done. On the bank side as well, the data suggests that some banks have seen the opportunity. They tap into the potential of this opportunity, but there are also quite some banks which are still kind of in this analysis mode and try to find their sweet spot, or also to decide, no, that's nothing that makes sense given our capabilities. So I think if I think about the fintech wave that we had like more than 10 years back, when fintech as a word started to emerge and people started to understand what fintech actually means, and the ecosystem also grew, we are at the very same stage right now, that banking as a service and embedded finance are just terms that are out there. They are being defined, understood. And I think we are just starting this evolution towards a new way of consuming financial services on the consumer side, and at the bottom, basically producing financial services and distributing them through non-bank channels, so to say. So I think we're just at the start, but I think it's going to be a very interesting evolution, and banks most probably will try to analyze which business model over time is more viable. Is it the traditional banking model, or is it basically the embedded finance / banking as a service business model?
Very interesting. I think to summarize, we learned definitely a lot about the innovation happening here in Switzerland, while, of course, embedded finance and banking as a service are crucial, important topics across the globe, with the new customer engagement in terms of embedded finance with new players in the ecosystem, but also with, of course, the traditional banks that can play with the banking as a service model a new kind of position and create new revenue streams. I look forward to read the studies. We will make sure, of course, we mention it or refer to it when we launch this episode. Besides that, is there any last comment you want to make? Where can we find you? I assume LinkedIn for sure. Mm-hmm. Where else?
Yeah, you find me on LinkedIn. I'm trying to push this topic also on the social media because I'm really kind of in love with the topic. Since ever, I have been very interested in the distribution piece of finance. So my PhD book basically that I wrote was also about distribution, was about omnichannel management. And in essence, embedded finance is also a new kind of distribution topic. So that's why I love it. Mm-hmm. And I think once the study that Simples is doing is out, you will hear on social media, on all the channels, what the conclusions and also the recommendations for banks, but also embedders are.
Looking forward to it. So thank you so much, Manuel Thomet. Always interesting discussion. I'm sure we will follow up in the near future. And with this House Check podcast, Manuel Thomet, our expert. Thank you, everyone, for listening. The podcast is available on all channels as usual. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.